Good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by assuring you that I'm keenly aware that I'm the last thing between you and lunch. I'd like to take a second and tip my hat and congratulate Paul as the new president of 1,000 Friends. I think his background is going to serve this organization extremely well. I'd like to take another moment and tip my hat to Sam and his presentation into Martin County on the very progressive and intelligent management approach they're taking to their water and sewer issues. Thank you for setting a good example there. I was fortunate to live and recreate and fish on the Chesapeake for most of my life. I have been fortunate to serve on the Bay's Chesapeake Bay Foundation for the past 25 years and have had the opportunity to serve as their chair from 98 to 2005. So what I'm going to share with you in the next few moments are some of the lessons, some of the experiences that I think are applicable here for us in Florida. Shortly after coming to Florida in 2009 to take care of my mom, Dolores and I came down and found out that one of our neighbors was Dr. Edie Witter, who's the CEO and chair and founder of Orca. And so you know how lovely Edie is and how bright she is. So when she asked me to join her board, I could not say no. Matter of fact, I was excited to. I was having environmental withdrawal pains. So that's been a wonderful experience. Last year she asked me to accept the position as chair. So now I'm knee-deep in the environmental issues in Florida here, which I'm proud to do. There have been a lot of lessons we've learned in the Chesapeake Bay. It's 51 years old, the association is this year. And it covers 64,000 acres, 6 states, New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, a little bit of Delaware, District of Columbia. And it has 20 million people today. And I thought you might find it interesting. That's 6 states in the District of Columbia. That's quite a challenge to get your arm around all that and get them to play team ball about restoration and preservation of the environment. Wouldn't it be easier if you just had one state? Florida has the same square miles and the same population. But we lack environmental leadership. Okay, what's the story here? This is what's left. This is perhaps one of the most salient points that I'll make today. I think you're keenly aware of it anyway. This is what's left in 2006 of what had been a 160-acre island in the southern end of Maryland's portion of the Chesapeake Bay. There were 60 such houses. There were 360 people. There was a preacher, a doctor, and a 2-room schoolhouse, and a fleet of 87 fishing vessels all under sail at the turn of the last century. What happened? When I fished there last spring, all that was left was the foundation. This is a microcosm of what we're going to see happen around our country and around the planet. We need to pay attention to the recent publication from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and their meeting in Incheon, South Korea 2 weeks ago. The sense of urgency that I had about this, I thought was pretty high, but it's been accelerated greatly. Naturally, in these situations, it takes perseverance. Clay, for instance, has persevered in helping pass legislation, Amendment 1 in particular, to get us where we should be, but the legislature ignored it. So we'll keep coming back. It's been litigated. Hopefully we'll win that at the end of the day. As Julie Andrews says, it's failing 19 times and succeeding 20. You have to keep getting up and moving forward. That's what it takes. Short story here. I got involved in the Bay Foundation in the early 90s. My predecessor also came out of the business community. Both of us had experiences rather broad, including marketing and sales and advertising and public relations. And we would spend a lot of time together saying we have to bring that toolkit into our Chesapeake Bay Foundation because the bottom line at the end of the day is we were selling something. We're like Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble. We're selling the restoration and preservation of our natural world. Well, how do you do that? We said we really need to know what our constituents, what our 250,000 members that we had at that time, and the general public. We need to know what they know, what they don't know, and what they don't know they don't know. So we began a rather rigorous, and it's continued to this day, it's part of our culture now, surveying people to find out what they knew, what they didn't know, and why. A couple of examples. Scientific-based organizations, which we were pretty much to that point in the 90s. We're talking about hypoxic and anoxic conditions, we're talking about nutrients. We found out that the public in general had no idea what hypoxic and anoxic was all about. And they thought nutrients were breakfast cereals. So we changed our messaging. We began talking about pollution. And we began talking about the dead zone in the main stem of the old Susquehanna riverbed of the Chesapeake Bay that had no oxygen below from 30 feet to the bottom, which was about 100 foot deep at that time. And the benthic conditions, the bottom of the soil conditions, were totally dead, totally void of sea life. So that helped us capture the hearts and minds of our constituents. And over time, our surveys indicated that the restoration of the environment in the natural world caused a visceral reaction to our publics in all of our states, particularly the Bay states, Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania. And we played to that, we messaged to that, and we found we gained more and more support. And we were 1 and 2 in their priority list in all the surveys we made. Naturally, we would share that with the politicians. So that was a big lesson we learned. Another lesson we learned is it was critically important. In the 90s, we didn't have what I call the pie chart. Critically important, whether it's me going into my endocrinologist or you going into your doctor, to find out what the root cause of your problems are. Not symptoms, but what are the root causes? So we finally put together, with the help of the Marine Institute and the University of Maryland School of Estuary and Sciences, EPA, our own scientific team, put together the pie chart of the Chesapeake, which was 22-23% nitrogen coming in from secondary treatment plants in the major metropolitan areas. 40-some% was from agricultural runoff. 800 million chickens a year in the eastern shore of Maryland, thousands and thousands of dairy cattle on the steep slopes in Pennsylvania as it came through their state. 1/3 air deposition, which has improved thanks to the clean air rules, and the balance of it from runoff from our backyards and urban-suburban conditions. So we said, we can't do all this at once. Let's aim at getting those sewage treatment plants upgraded to advanced wastewater treatment, as has been done in Martin County, and to tertiary treatment, as they call it. We were so fortunate that we had the critical element in challenges like we face. We had leadership by Democrats and Republicans in the state houses and in the leadership. We raised $1 billion in Virginia out of general funds. And the governor in Maryland saw fit to put $3 a month on all the residential connections, did it on a square footage basis for commercial and residential, raised $1 billion that upgraded all of our major sewage treatment plants to advanced wastewater treatment, no higher than 3 milligrams per liter from the effluent. Big step forward. Took a decade to do it. Didn't see anything happen overnight. Then we reached an impasse. In the early 2000s, we did a timeout at the board and said to ourselves, we hate to admit it, we're looking in the mirror here, but we're just not going to save this Chesapeake Bay in our lifetime. It's going to take more. And the only thing we could find, spending hours with our general counsel inside and outside counsel that were experts in this regard, the only thing, the big life ring that was going to save the Chesapeake was the Clean Water Act, passed in 1972. One of Nat Reed's close colleagues was a supporter of ours, Russell Train and his wife, Aileen. We looked at that act and realized that impaired waters would allow EPA to pull the trigger to enforce certain measures on the states. So we sued EPA to enforce that act. Bush administration was in office. They fought us, change of office. Obama came in. Lisa Jackson was the new administrator. They had an enlightened view of the world. They appreciated what we were talking about. We settled the case and formed a 6-state collaborative, working hand in glove with the 6 states, all their scientists, and built basically what was to become a pollution diet for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediments for the 6 states. But what was different about this is that it had accountability, it had metrics, it had a timeline, and it had penalties. Finally, we had teeth to enforce the act. No sooner had the ink dried on the act, and we were sued. We thought, what? We're being sued. The ag industry from the Midwest primarily, the corn growers, the hog growers, the Fertilizer Institute, and on, they did not want to be held accountable by that Clean Water Act in their backyard. But then what was more shocking than had me write editorials and had my hair on fire is that Governor Scott and Pam Bondi from Florida joined the suit and said, no, we don't want it here either. And I realized what was happening with Florida at that time, thanks to Dr. Witter and the Marine Resources Council and Lisa and others that I was interfacing with. Florida's in big trouble here. What are they doing fighting this? Well, we won in district court, we won in the Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court denied taking the case. It's the law of the land. In 8 years, since that's been in place, we've been able to get the ag industry to do what they had to do. It's not a done job, but huge progress was made. We had some federal money from the Farm Bill to give them money for cover crops, buffer strips, and so forth, so they could do their part of it. Today, when I go back and fish in the Chesapeake, we have 105,000 acres of subaquatic vegetation, or seagrass, if you will. The water clarity is an astounding 10 to 15 feet deep in the middle of the bay. Naturally, the fisheries are rebounding, and it's been given worldwide recognition. It's a story that proves this job can be done. The other major items that we've done at the Chesapeake Bay, we had a four-legged stool we operated under: education, restoration, advocacy, and as I mentioned a moment ago, litigation when all else fails. I hope we don't have to do that in Florida. I hope this next election puts people in office that understand what we're talking about. Moving ahead, after coming here, Dr. Lisa Soto called me. She's the newly elected Executive Director of Marine Resources Council. We have the chairman of that council, I think you're still the chair, aren't you, with us today. And she said, look, we're going to have something called the American Assembly. Eisenhower actually started this back in the 50s. And we're going to focus on the lagoon. She said, would you come and tell the story about the Chesapeake Bay? I said, sure. I did that. And after that, I had the Sierra Club, I had the Surf Riders, I had every environmentally inclined organization in the county come up and say, would you do the presentation for us? And then Vince Lamb, who's Mr. Environment and a collaborator in every endeavor to preserve the environment in Brevard County, and a fellow by the name of Spence Curran, who was the president at the time of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, kept coming back to me and said, look, what can we do? What should we do? I said, well, you know, in the Chesapeake, I'm used to being the 800-pound gorilla player with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. 250,000 members. When we spoke, the politicians listened. Here, you've got a lot of well-intentioned groups. Why don't we form a coalition? I actually brought George Jones from the Rivers Coalition and Judy Orcott from Indian River up to Brevard with a group of about 15 people. And I said, look, this is what they've done. We can form this coalition. Everybody gets under the tent together. We can make a difference in Brevard County. They happen to be 71% of the Indian River Lagoon. We did that. And I'll never forget sitting on the back porch of Beau Platte in January of 16, and I looked around and I said, here's what's got to happen. You're going to form a 501c3. Somebody's got to be the president. Somebody's got to be the vice president. Somebody's got to be the treasurer. And a young woman who was so impressive, I'll never forget her, Melissa Martin, retired Marine Corps, Adjutant General, mother homeschooling 3 boys, major. She said, well, I'll do it if you help me. And somebody else said, I'll be the trigger. That's how it happened. Maggie came to Florida Institute of Technology in February of 16, joined me at the podium. We both gave presentations. You remember that, Maggie? They were standing in the aisles. They were begging for help. That led to a very, very constructive thing that happened because we had, fortunately, a businessman chairing the 5-member Brevard Coalition, James Barfield and Kurt Smith, who provided the leadership to say, we're going to do something about this. They gave Virginia Barker, their world-class natural resources director, the order to develop a plan. She put together a plan, very comprehensive, attacking all the root causes in the Brevard portion of the lagoon. August that summer, standing room only, when they took the vote, our coalition had everybody there in their Save Our Lagoon little blue shirts. 67 people spoke in favor of it. One said they had a question about it. It passed overwhelmingly. It passed on the ballot, 61% in every voting district, and as Clay mentioned a moment ago, it was expected to generate $34 million a year for a decade, $340 million. Well, guess what? The economy's good, it's going to generate about $440 million. But here's where I need to transition with you, because we sat down afterwards at the Brevard Indian River Lagoon Coalition Board. We said, 11 of us sat down, and I said, you know, I hate to rain on the parade. Oh, time's out. But I said, you know, there's more to this story than we like to face up to. It's going to take more money. The problem's so big, it's going to. And there are others that have the same problem. Other estuaries in Florida. This is going to be a really condensed version of this answer because time's up. We reached out to Debbie Mayfield, Gail Harrell, Joe Negron. We wanted a statewide coalition to provide matching funds to cities and counties around Florida's estuaries to help them address their issues, whether it was upgrading sewage treatment plants, whether it was sewer, septic to sewer conversion, stormwater, whatever. It failed, didn't get out of committee. In February this past year, we said, okay, Dwayne DeFreeze working within the IRL, NEP IRL, and his colleagues in the other three on the West Coast. They understood the need. They represent 50% of the coastline of Florida. So we put together a plan to reach out to everyone else. Long story made short, you know the pain and suffering that Florida is under today between the algal blooms, the cyanobacteria, and the red tides. It's hurting us, but it's also hurting the real estate industry. We are now joined by the Florida State Board of Realtors. Can you imagine the magnitude of that membership and the dollars involved? We're now joined by the Indian River neighborhood associations up and down the lagoon. We're joined by the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Associations, all in Tallahassee, all with lobbyists, the CCA of Florida, the Marine Trades Industries, and more. And that's what it's going to take. All of us, particularly with the business community and the environmental community, to tell the newly elected officials in Florida, you have to step up. You don't have an alternative here. This is an investment that has to be made if we're going to save Florida. And as someone said to me, if we don't, what's going to happen? And the only alternative I saw in answering that is that that would be litigation, which would be a shame. I don't know if you're familiar with Jack Davis's award-winning book, The Gulf, but my favorite quote comes from there. We will live longer if we align ourselves with the natural balance that predates us and the biosphere that supports us. That's so succinct and so on point. It ought to be taught in every K through 12 program. Thank you very much.